rise today to contribute to the grievance debate, and I agree for the people of country Victoria today, Speaker, and particularly those in the far east of the state. And I don't grieve for them for the shocking condition of our local roads. I've done that before. Not for the lack of infrastructure investment or the soaring cost of living and massively increased state debt. Today I grieve for the lack of bushfire preparedness in our region. Just 4 short years after we should have learned the lesson of a lifetime, we see ourselves in a very vulnerable state again. Now, following the 2009 bushfires, we had a Royal Commission, and it recommended that at least 5% of the bush be burnt on a rotational basis to keep us safe. These are the preeminent bushfire scientists in the country saying you've got to burn at least 5%. Some who presented to that Bushfire's Royal Commission recommended 8%, in line with what occurs in Western Australia, but we settled on 5%. Now, in 2015, when this government came to power, it decided to head down a different path, and it set up its own new inquiry. Why we needed another inquiry after we had a Royal Commission, I'm not sure, but it came up with a new inquiry to come up with a more palatable outcome for what it wanted. And what it's done is it ended up with a lot less fuel reduction burning being done. Now, this new approach basically said we're only going to focus on fuel reduction burning around the townships and around assets. That's where we're going to focus our fuel reduction burns. It's no use burning out in the wider bush. And this new approach, Speaker, was called Safer Together. Safer Together. And our Minister, Lisa Neville, said at the time, our new approach is about doing more to reduce the risk of bushfire and knowing what we do is more effective. Now, how did Safer Together go in 2019-20? It didn't go real well, Speaker, when it had to pass the test of a hot summer. Now, under Safer Together, just 5 years after Safer Together came in, we saw probably the second biggest bushfire in our recorded history in the state. And there's a couple of points I want to make. Firstly, many locals saw this coming because under Safer Together, they knew that the fuel loads in the bush had reached record levels that they had not seen before in their lifetimes. Now, these people, they came into my office, they stopped me in the street, they approached me at coffee shops. They were former firefighters, they were departmental staffers, they were old timber industry workers, they were people who've worked in the bush all their lives. And they said to me, we're going to have a mega fire because we've allowed fuel loads to increase out of control. Now, I'm not saying this after the event, because in 2019, in October, I wrote a lengthy column in our local paper based on what these people who've lived in the bush all their lives were telling me, that if it wasn't this year, it would be the year after or the year after. Anyway, it happened. It's not rocket science. If you allowed fuel loads to build up to record levels, how is it ever going to end, apart from a mega fire? There is no other way it can end. It is as simple as that. Now, when we have a warming climate, and we let fuel loads build up to the levels that we did, it is only going to end in a horrible, horrible situation. And we saw that. We saw that. So while the Bushfires Royal Commission, our preeminent scientists recommended 5%, no, we got a group together in 2015 that said that's going to cost a bit much, it's a bit hard to do. And they've come up with a program where since then we've only had 1.5% of the bush burnt on a rotational basis. Now, when the recommendation from our preeminent scientists is 5% and they come up with 1.5%, I mean, the world's gone mad. We're just not listening to the people who know. Now, the result was a 1.6 million hectare fire, 396 houses destroyed. There were lives lost under Safer Together, because we're safer together, because we're burning a lot less of the bush. We're not safer, we're more at risk, and we continue to be at greater risk, Speaker. Now, because of the current huge fuel loads, which are now existing 4 years later because of all the dead trees, the debris, the black wattle infestation, country members have seen all this, a very flammable undergrowth has burnt back after the fires, we now find ourselves in the same situation. And those same people who warned us this was going to happen are warning us again that it's going to happen again. And it will only ever end in major fires. Now, when we have these major fires, the Greens come out, there's none in the chamber at the moment, and they shout climate change. It's the only reason. Well, a warming environment it's part of the puzzle. But whether we've got climate change or not, summers are hot and record fuel loads are going to end up in mega fires. You cannot just simply pluck climate change out and say that is the cause. We should be doing more burns. We should be doing more cool, controlled burns throughout the year to make sure that we restore the balance of the bush, because we put out all these lightning strikes and fires in summer, and when the cooler months come, we don't restore the balance. If we let those fires go, they would be simmering away for 3 and 4 months over every summer. But we go in and we put them out because we want to protect our communities. Okay, but you then have to restore that balance that you've altered, Speaker, and we don't restore that balance. Now, I want to quote Professor Kevin Tolhurst from the University of Melbourne, probably one of the most preeminent bushfire scientists in this country, but certainly in this state. Just 2 weeks ago, he said legislation of restricting fire has been counterproductive to a large extent. He said we really need to change our whole philosophy of having fire in the landscape. He strongly supports reintroducing more low-intensity fire into the landscape, and he's correct. He's 100% right. He's saying what the wise old heads in all of our communities keep coming and keep telling us. Now, he strongly supports more year-round burning, more regularly, and creating a mosaic outcome of fuel reduction burns. Now, it's a situation where we are miles away from that outcome that not only the Bushfires Royal Commission recommended, but what experts like Professor Tolhurst are recommending. Now, you can get away with it for a while, this safer together fluffy stuff, you can get away with that for a while, but it's always going to catch up with you. Because when the fuel loads build and build and build, you might dodge a bullet one summer, but it builds and builds and builds, and it's caught up with us not only in 2020, in 2009, 2007 and 2003, all major fires. Now, Dr Tolhurst, I think I promoted him to professor before, but Dr Tolhurst summed this up very well when he said we should be going in and burning areas as often as we can to break up the landscape. So it's not much of a stretch from the way the traditional owners used to use fire in the landscape. As they moved through the landscape, they'd ignite areas that were flammable as they passed through, and they passed through often enough so that over time they'd continue to burn the most flammable parts regularly. Then you're left with the less flammable parts that would burn later in the summer season. So you can see from these comments, it's all about burning regularly, consistently, and we are not doing that in this state, and it leaves us in the bush vulnerable. Let's talk about the effectiveness of fuel reduction burning for just a few moments. I don't know if many members of Parliament saw this. I know a few did. But when we got the map of the footprint of the 2019-20 fires in East Gippsland, it was incredible the amount of times where it stopped where it abutted a fuel reduction burn done in the last 2 years. I think honourable members have seen that map. In 7 or 8 locations, the fire has burnt and almost stopped immediately. No people present, no firefighters at a lot of these places. They were at some, but in other places the fire stopped of its own accord because it hit a fuel reduction burn reduced area. One of the best examples was at Painted Line Track just out of Orbost, and the fire actually hit there on a day of a really hot northerly, and it still stopped it. The fuel reduction burn that had been done the year before still stopped it, and there are great aerial shots around of that occurring. Now, in recent times, the government provided commentary that burning the wider bush is ineffective. And I put up the Tostaree fire as evidence that burning in the wider bush is effective. What happened at the Tosteree fire is it was threatening the township of Orbost, and it was in the tranquility of the night, miles from any township, where it came up against a fuel reduction burn. In the early hours of the morning, the intensity had gone out of the fire, and it was there. It was there that firefighters were able to get on top of that fire. Now, we can't predict where a fire's going to go. We can't predict the weather of the day. We've got to maintain fuel loads in the wider bush, because it is often going to be in the wider bush as to where we can stop these fires that the next day might impact on townships. That's why fuel reduction burns in the wider bush are also important. These cool burns that are done are also much better for the environment. Going through the wider bush after 2019-20 was like going on walking through a moonscape. There was nothing there. Everything destroyed, dust on the ground. It is a better outcome for the environment. Now, in Victoria, the government only ever really achieves its bushfire residual risk target of 70% when it counts the wildfire that's occurred. Now, this is interesting. These are the fires that they claim under Safer Together that they're protecting us from, but they count them, they count those areas to reach their fuel reduction targets. It's a nonsense. The fuel reduction target has got to be the target that's achieved through fuel reduction, so we don't have to count those mega fires after the event, after it's too late. So the government counts, says it's protecting against its burn targets and then leaving a more flammable landscape in the years afterwards, and this is what we're seeing now. Now, what happens with a cool burn is it gets rid of the rubbish on the ground, the fuel loads on the ground that need controlling. When we have a fire like we had in 2019-20 that destroys everything, the regrowth of all the shrubs, the black wattle infestation, a bush they call petrol bush because it's so flammable, that just pops up everywhere. So after a major, really hot fire, we actually can end up 3 or 4 years later with another explosion ready to occur. Whereas if we manage this through regular cool burning, we would never find ourselves in that situation. The minister should go now and inspect the areas that were burned in 2019 and 20 in East Gippsland. Because what the minister would find now is debris lying all over the ground. She would find a lot of very, very flammable undergrowth, including black wattle infestation right throughout a whole lot of the bush. And she would see a landscape and a scene that is what has got us all very, very concerned about this summer again. 4 years after we should have learned our lesson, we find ourselves hopefully dodging a bullet, but very, very likely going to have significant fires in the east of the state again. And I had a briefing with the CFA Friday a week ago where they said our soil moisture content in the east is as low as it's ever been before. That does not augur well for summer when we, as a collective, have allowed fuel loads to get out of control. It can only end one way. Only end one way. To make matters worse, Speaker, before I finish, is everyone from the country will know when the proverbial hits the fan, the first line of defence is our timber industry. They are in there, they are pushing the fire breaks with flames and sparks around their cabins, they're doing the hard yards, they're in there protecting our communities and putting their lives on the line. That's what they've done year after year after year, and recent years have been no different. So now we're faced with our first line of defence being taken away, removed, the timber industry gone, massive fuel loads in the bush, and the government continuing to trot out this rubbish that we're safer together because we're burning a lot less just around the townships. We are fair income living in fantasy land. We are living in dreamland if we think that we are safer because of this new burning program that's been introduced. It's time we got serious about this. We started listening to the experts. We started putting in place regular burns, making sure that our communities are protected. And if we're going to get rid of the timber industry, for goodness sake, let's put, while we're sorting out what goes on there, let's put a whole truckload of those fellas and their machinery and those families on contract to look after us for at least the next 2 summers.